Hey guys, Gary Fong here, and I was going through my bin and I found this. This is my very first Sony a6000, and there's quite a story behind this camera because as soon as I got this camera, I started to recognize that this is not an ordinary thing, and this might actually start a revolution, the revolution in wireless and electronic viewfinder. So here's what happened. I asked Sony for to borrow a lens or something like that, and they wound up sending me a box with this little camera on it. And it was interesting because I didn't know why they would send, you know, being a professional photographer, a little camera like this. It's not a point and shoot. It's not a larger format. Back then it was the A mount. This was kind of the first of that new breed of mirrorless. Well, anyway, so I opened the box and I thought, this is really strange. Why would they send that? So I called Robert Evans, a friend of mine who's now one of Sony artisans. And he wasn't with Sony at the time, but he had heard of this camera. And he said, wow, you have one of those? Those are extremely in demand. They haven't really even sent them out to press yet. That's amazing. And I said, what's so good about this? And he said, well, it's the fastest autofocus in the world. And so I pulled it out, and my kids were toddlers back then, and I stuck it on and started playing with it, and I absolutely could not believe what I was witnessing. Now, let me tell you why this was a groundbreaking camera, and it's weird, right? Because it wound up becoming the #1 best-selling interchangeable lens camera, I think, of all time, unless I've read that wrong, but not of all time, but, you know, a record of that year or something like that. The a6000, which then went on to spawn the 6300, 6500, then the 6400, all advanced iterations of this. But what made this one so groundbreaking was, #1, the electronic viewfinder. The electronic viewfinder was a very groundbreaking thing because it allowed you to see through the viewfinder if you're shooting in black and white or color. That was the first thing that I thought. It's like, wow, this is cool. I can actually see. Or if I wanted to do exposure overrides, like if I wanted to really blow out the background on a backlit subject and make it look high key, I could do that and see it on here and instantly capture it. Also, if I was shooting in extremely low light situations, I was able to see much better. So, you know, optical, it's just like, it's optical. And when you're in a very dark reception room, it's harder to see when it's at night. Sometimes I remember when I used to shoot with film, I'd have the videographer, you know, shine the light in my direction so I'd be able to see. Anyway, with electronic viewfinder, of course, it will crank it up to the exposure that you need in your eyepiece and allow you to see it. Plus, on top of that, you had the option of seeing it through the rear. So that was the cool part about what I thought about was mirrorless, was the non-DSLR, the electronic viewfinder. This happened to have a very good viewfinder. But the thing that was incredible was the subject tracking. And the subject tracking was something I'd never seen before. And I think it was called Expand Flexible Spot, or Lock On Expand Flexible Spot. It was a very interesting moniker for what it did. But when I showed it and I hooked it up to a video recorder, I mean, it was an incredible sensation. And it was interesting back at the time because I met Neil Manowitz when I was in Germany at Photokina, and he had just come on as the Sony Alpha product manager. He's probably had like a dozen promotions since then, and now he's, you know, vice president of North America in imaging. And but back then he was the product chief for the Alpha, and it was at something like 5%. Sony was 5% market share, and people would look at me weird because I'd walk around with a Sony with a Sony camera strap, and people thought, well, what? You know, he must be paid because everything was Canon and Nikon, and I shot Canon for quite a few number of years. I did a lot of promotional work with Canon, but then I started to see how brilliant this was in the mirrorless. And so when I met Neil, I said, Neil, you know, you guys are going to be #1 in this category. Just depends on how much of a hurry you are to get there. And he said, I'm in a big hurry. So of course they did get there. You know, always been a fan of great innovation and technology. And what happened with Sony was that they had such great groundbreaking features that the engineers were so far ahead of the ability to explain what they did that I took it upon myself to create a series of videos. And so my videos are called Camera QuickStart. They were a series called Unleash the Power of Your Sony camera, and that still is, you can see that here, but under Camera QuickStart, when you go on here, you'll be able to see all of the different videos that we have to teach you how to unleash the power of these very advanced cameras, all the way up to the Sony A9 or the Sony A7R3. The nice thing that I have with Sony is that the ability to have access to these cameras, and really good access, like I'm able to go to these events that they put together to show the autofocus and show how incredible the autofocus is. So I'm there and I'm seeing all the engineering that goes into these cameras, but then I'm even seeing seasoned veteran journalists having a hard time configuring, because we all have our filters and our habits, right? So one thing that I found about professional photographers, they don't have time to sit down and work with these cameras. They don't have time to sit down and figure it out. And so the Canon photographer just knows this is where that wheel is and this is where that is, and I know how to set things and everything like that. So you put a mirrorless in their hands, and it's going to take quite a bit of time. So what I do in my Camera QuickStart courses is I pretend that I'm sitting down right here with you, and I say, okay, the first thing you're going to do is understand that the wheel has a hierarchy. It starts off with the automatic modes, which would be intelligent auto and things like that. Then you go to program, or then you go to scene, then you go to program. And actually the camera is designed to stepwise teach you how to smarten up and become more sophisticated. But in the very beginning, if you use just the program functions, the camera's artificial intelligence does a really good job at giving you performance. Like, if you're moving around real quick, it kind of knows you're doing sports, or there's algos in it where it if it catches someone running, you'll see that the scene switches into sports capture mode. So it's pretty freaking advanced. And then after that, I teach you how to unleash the power of your camera. I mean, when this camera first came out, it had eye autofocus and still capture, but there was no way to access it unless you actually went in and did a custom menu setup for this. So it's been my pleasure to bring to you the Camera QuickStart courses. They're like $20, or we even have How to Photograph a Wedding, which is, these tend to be like this one right here. Unleash the Power of Your Sony A7 III is 4 hours and 45 minutes. So really do a deep dive into this video, and very, very interesting things. Like I teach you how to shoot manual with auto ISO, making the manual kind of a program mode, but and I'll explain that in some of the videos. And again, if you want to find out anything about how to do certain features, upgrade the firmware or whatever, just go to my YouTube channel and subscribe, because I've got over 1,000 videos for photography. But when we go into the deep dive for the camera, and by the way, if you're out there and you're thinking about purchasing a camera, get the course first, because then you'll be familiar with it. Should I spend, $4,800 or whatever on a Sony A9? Yes. And this will actually get you more excited. Or should I spend under $1,000 for the Sony A6400? Yes, you should. But the video will get you more excited. So by the time the box arrives, you'll already be an expert. And if you're thinking about making the switch from Sony to Canon or Nikon to Sony, then, or mirrorless from DSLR, get one of these things, choose the camera that you like, and investigate it. Plunk down $20 or so, and then find out exactly what these things do, so that when you get it, you'll know exactly how to unleash the power of your camera. So make sure to subscribe, and thanks for tuning in.